Hi friends, if you're enjoying this series and you'd like to help me reach even more people with thinking faith, please consider supporting the show. Silver supporters get early access to episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed books and a monthly catch-up with me. The links to support are with the show notes or visit justinbrierley.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Jordan was sitting in the office. The doctor was talking to both of us. We were both receiving the news. The first person I told was Julian. And when I told him, I saw that his mother was dying, which was a whole different scenario than that I was dying. And then I could feel the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. And it seemed really all of a sudden common sense for me to say to him, Julian, only God knows when I'm going to die. The doctor, he has an opinion, a medical opinion, but it's an opinion. It's not a certainty. Only God knows when I'm going to die. Jordan can't even explain it, which is hard on his logic. It's hard on his logic. Yeah.
Hello there, this is Justin Brierley and welcome to episode 21 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, departing from our documentary format this week, as we occasionally do, for an extended conversation with Tammy Peterson about cancer, Catholicism, healing and being married to Jordan Peterson. I feel like these interesting stories of significant personalities being converted, entering the church, getting baptized are happening an awful lot right now, and Tammy is one of these surprising conversion stories. Before we jump in though, a reminder that you can get early access to shows like this when you become a silver supporter at justinbrierley.com. Gold level supporters also receive signed copies of both my books and a chance for a monthly catch-up if you'd like it. You can support via Patreon or US tax deductible giving. If you've been enjoying this podcast, why not consider helping us to continue it through the rest of the year? The links to support are with today's show. Now, I don't know if you're sensing this, but I think there have been some really interesting recent signs of a sort of a new openness to spirituality in various parts of the West. Interestingly, here in the UK, the Church of England has just posted a rise in attendance of church-going in the past year, in contrast to years of decline. Church leaders of different denominations have sent me many stories of unprecedented numbers in their churches over the Easter period. And in France, interestingly, the Catholic Church has seen a surprising 31% increase in adult baptisms in the past year. Could it be a sign that the tide is turning? I guess time will tell. We'll see. What I do know is that there's also a stream of fascinating examples of high-profile individuals coming to faith. And in many ways, my guest today, Tammy Peterson, is one of them. Tammy is married to Jordan Peterson, the well-known Canadian psychologist and author who rose to global prominence in 2018 and whose YouTube channel and live lectures have been watched and attended by millions. Tammy's daughter Michaela is also a popular video and podcast host who helped Jordan through a health crisis between 2019 to 2021. Tammy also hosts her own podcast as well, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from. Well, in the midst of a roller coaster few years for her whole family, there's been Tammy's own stepping into faith, a journey that was really precipitated by her own health crisis in 2019 when she was given a terminal diagnosis from a rare and aggressive form of kidney cancer. But just earlier this year, Tammy was received at Easter into the Catholic Church, cancer-free. And today I'm going to be exploring Tammy and her wider family's journey and the circumstances that have brought her to faith. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Tammy Peterson. Well, just before we get into the rest of today's show, someone we've heard from quite a bit on the podcast is author and speaker Glenn Scrivener. Hello, Glenn.
Hey, Justin. Always great to be here.
Well, for a while now, you've been happily pointing people to your online course 321. Where did that come from?
It's a passion of mine to help people get to grips with Christian faith and to do it in a way that's attractive and imaginative and deep and that assumes no prior knowledge. So 321 is my way of showing life according to Jesus. We want it to be like a mere Christianity for a digital age.
Okay, so that sounds like it's maybe more for those who are not Christians.
Well, yeah, many people have done it who are not Christians, and they've found faith for the first time. We're thrilled about that. But like with Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, Christians love that book too. And the first audience we have in mind for 321 is actually a Christian who wants to be refreshed in their faith and to have something to pass on to their Christian curious friends and family.
Okay, so Christian or not, this basically gets people to the heart of the faith.
Right, and nearly 10,000 people have joined the online platform. It's free. You watch these video-led sessions and you think through the stunning animations, you engage with the chat community, you get a ton of extra content thrown in, and now you have on your phone a Mere Christianity that you can share with others. So the phrase we're using is, you can share this without shame, without cost, and without delay.
Well, we've been really enjoying promoting 321, and listeners to this podcast can get into it instantly by going to 321course.com/JB. That's 321course.com/JB. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you, Justin. Keep up the good work.
Welcome along to the show, Tammy.
Thanks very much, Justin. I'm happy to be here.
I feel like this is very much a family affair. In the past, I've interviewed Jordan. I've spoken to Michaela as well. And now you, it feels like the whole family in some way is coming together in this way. You've had an amazing journey recently, Tammy. Tell us about what happened over Easter weekend. You were received into the Catholic Church. What was that day like? What were your feelings?
What was that day like? It was joyous, really.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was, for me, I was very relaxed and accepting. I had surrendered already to the inevitability of entering into the church. It wasn't my plan particularly. It was a plan that came upon me, and I was just willing to go with what seemed like the next right step until there I was, receiving the rights to become a Catholic. So,
is that something you'd have ever anticipated, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago?
I don't think so. I was pretty strong, self-willed woman. I'd always been pretty much in control of my life and making my decisions. You know, when we're small and young, we get through life with our childhood ideas of what is the best way to deal with the challenge that comes to us. And if we don't have a personal relationship with God, and maybe even if we do, because we're children, the choices we make about how we're going to deal with things are childish in some way. And if we don't update that childish plan, then that's how we go out into the world. And so self-will was something that I, discovered early on, and that seemed to serve me well when I was young. But eventually it just didn't serve me well anymore.
I mean, was faith ever part of the picture growing up? Were there any influences upon you?
Yes, there were. My grandmothers were both in the Protestant church. My dad's grandmother played the piano in her church, and my other grandmother sang in the choir in her church, and they went to church every Sunday. In fact, my grandma, who played the piano, traveled with a band. Once her husband had had a stroke and was in the hospital at 83, she did some traveling around Alberta, playing the piano in a band that was faith-based, that came from the church. So, and my aunt, my dad's sister, she played with the Sweet Adelines, which is a group of women who get together and sing. And so her faith was in and out of the church, but so the church was always some part of my dad's life. And I was young in my family. So I was 5 years younger than my youngest sister and 8 years younger than my brother. And there were three of them, my brother and my two sisters. And they remember, I was just talking to them actually, because I don't remember my parents being in church at all. But my sister said, that she remembers going to church, that my dad took her to church, and he had her help collect the offerings in the church. And so he was there. But by the time I came along, he was deep into curling and golf and real estate and insurance.
Yeah,
so he was deep into the material world, I would say. He was deep into the material world. And so my experience was more secondhand. I went to school. I went to Sunday school. But once my family left, and, we lived, as Jordan did, 400 miles north of the next major city. And so when my siblings left home, they left home, and I saw them at Christmas and maybe Easter, but some in the summer maybe, but they were gone when they were gone, and they left and I left the church.
Yeah. Well, it's a very similar story, I'm sure, to many people.
I think so.
who perhaps there's been some background sort of relatives in the faith, but for whom it just sort of slipped away. And as you say, it sounds like you kind of became a very self-reliant person, and in a sense, you didn't necessarily feel the need for faith or religion in your life. But obviously that did change quite dramatically in recent years. Now, just before we talk about this health crisis that precipitated this journey towards Catholicism, I'd love to just set it in the wider context, because, as I say, you'd already been on quite a ride up to that point. You'd obviously been married for some time to your childhood sweetheart, Jordan, successful academic, clinical psychologist, but had just, by 2018, been experiencing this meteoric rise to prominence. His best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life, his message about responsibility and identity and purpose, and the wisdom actually found in the Bible were attracting thousands to hit, these sellout tours and auditoriums and so on. So what did life look like in the midst of all of that, this sudden sort of rise to fame that was happening to Jordan Peterson at this point?
Well, it definitely was sudden. It happened in a day. It happened in a moment. Jordan came down in the morning and said that he had real deep trouble. He could see deep trouble brewing, and he felt that he had to say something publicly. And I said, well, you've been talking to me about these problems for 30 years. Why don't you just tell everybody? Let's see what happens. And so that afternoon, I was home. My son was home, and we were both on the phone, and there were reporters in the kitchen, in the study with my husband, on the porch, and in their cars outside. And we thought, oh, I guess this is what happened. And we thought that would stop, and it never stopped. And mostly it never stopped because Jordan had all of his videos documented and online. So when people came to see what his dark past was like, they found out what it was like because it was all there, and they couldn't really say anything about it because everything was in black and white, as they say, which is now on video mostly. And I had had some health troubles already. I had arthritis in my thumbs and my knees, and I had stopped doing my work. I was a massage therapist for very many years, and I stopped about 6 months before that happened. And so I was meditating at home on about what I might find myself doing. But I wasn't rushing it. I was thinking, it's going to come what I should do, but I don't know what that is. And I noticed that my husband was very busy, and I thought maybe I could help him. And then it was within that week, I think, that this happened. And so I was at home, and I was there. I wasn't off doing other things, so I could help him with it was very overwhelming. And not just logistically, but of course they had, the university had questioned his attendance there. He still taught for another semester after that before he finally retired. But everything was up. Everything was up. His clinical practice, should he continue to do that? Because he wasn't able to concentrate like he could before. And so he didn't think that was fair to his clients. And so there was a lot up in the air. And because I was home, I was able to be an ear for him. I could listen, and I could say yes. And, something that we laugh about is he was quite distraught at everything. It was kind of spooky because it felt like our house was going to be attacked. Maybe our windows were going to be broken. Yeah, I think the only thing that happened was somebody pushed over our garbage cans one night and flipped me a bird, and I just yelled, "God be with you," because it's just like, what are you going to do in this situation?
Yeah,
Right?
extraordinary stuff. I mean, what you're referencing here is, in a sense, the early kind of sort of rise of Jordan when he was protesting freedom of speech, essentially, in Canada,
Yes.
and not being forced to use pronouns and so on, as would have kind of come into law. Now, that was certainly, I would say, the genesis of the way in which Jordan kind of became a bit of a cult figure, to many people. I really began to engage with his work when I started to see his lectures on the Book of Genesis being shared quite widely online. And I was just stunned to see hundreds of people turning out for a good 2 or 3 hours of just an in-depth lecture on the Book of Genesis. I thought, goodness, how many pastors would love to have that kind of thing going on in their church, and attracting a demographic that is often missing, actually, in many churches, interestingly. And then I had the enormous privilege of hosting him in a conversation when he came to the UK on an early tour in 2018 to promote 12 Rules for Life opposite atheist psychologist Susan Blackmore. And again, I was so surprised to find Jordan, although not a professing Christian, really speaking on behalf of the Christian vision of humanity and being made in God's image and so on. So he's always been a very, very interesting person to me as a Christian myself, as someone who obviously is almost a prophet from outside the church, kind of reorienting people back towards the value of Christian faith in that way. And then, as far as I'm aware, you've tried to, as you say, sort of be available and to go with him on that journey. You've often, I think, traveled with him, as he's obviously been able to now speak to hundreds of thousands of people around the world as well, Tammy.
That's right. I traveled with him in 2018, and I also went to the Bible lectures, and I couldn't believe I think it was Thursday night, there would be people lined up down blocks and blocks of people every Thursday night to get into this theater and listen to him speak, which was phenomenal. And then I went to, it was the same people every week too, 13 weeks. It was a university class. It was a 13-week class. Yeah, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that. And it was young men. It wasn't just young men, but it was virtually all young men that were there, which was the same thing that happened when we went on 2018. And I sat in the crowd. I went anonymously, and I worked on logistics with him to make sure that he was fed and got to the theater on time and was rested and all of that. So I looked at how he was conducting his days so that his lecture would go well. And so that was, but I was wondering all the time what I was doing there. But I was sitting in the class, I was sitting in the lecture, and I talked to people. Sometimes if there were protesters outside, I went and I talked to them too, to see what it was that they were up. And they were so confused, right? They were just so, and we've seen that now, what they're like, but they were so confused. They were grabbing onto something that was, what was it? It was that a driver in, I think it was Vancouver, had driven and mowed down some people and killed some people. And they had all their portraits up outside of the theater, and they were upset about it. And I thought, yeah, that's a terrible thing, but what are you doing here? And they couldn't put into words what they were doing there. They were just outraged. Yeah. And so people are outraged by what's going on in the world, but they don't know what to do with it. And the ones that had come in and listened to Jordan, they're finding a way, right? They're finding a way to listen to him and to find some common sense in their lives, and to find some, what I found courage and strength and guidance after I spent my year with him, about 3/4 of the way through that, it was probably at the end of it, because I went on a walking tour with my sister to Croatia, which was a wonderful thing to do for about 10 days. And I had gone on a carnivore diet before that so that I could walk in Croatia, because my knees had been so bad. And my daughter said her arthritis was getting better. And I was just down to meat and lettuce by then. So I just gave up the lettuce, and within 2 weeks, my knees started to loosen. And I thought, okay, I don't know, but let's go with this. And so I went to Croatia and I walked with her for 10 days, which was great because that was the end of really my private life by then. And I came back, and 2 weeks later, I was sick and had a fever, and my digestion was upset, and then it didn't get better. And I went to the doctor, and he said, maybe you have a parasite. And I thought, oh yeah, that could be. And he did a scan, and it was an ultrasound, and he saw a shadow on my kidney. And so then he thought, oh, well, So then I had to come back. I think we'd gone to Ireland because now this was continuing, this tour that Jordan was on. And so it was continuing, and I had already decided that I was going to travel with him. And so I was traveling with him, and I came back, had a biopsy, and then went back on tour. And they told me what I had was a type of cancer, a renal cell carcinoma that grows 1 millimeter a year and that doesn't kill people, that I should have the surgery done, but there was no rush. And so in March of 2019 was when I came back for surgery, and we were finished the tour. We'd gone to Australia. I think we were supposed to go to South Africa. We were maybe going to go to Southeast Asia, but it seemed that I had waited long enough, and it was time to go home. And so we went home. I had surgery, and I was getting better for my surgery, but then I got a pain in my back, and I told my doctor I had a pain in my back, just kind of a vertical pain, not just a pain in your low back, but a pain that kind of went up and down. And he called me into the office soon after that, myself and my husband, and his hands were shaking, and he was getting me to sign forms for another surgery because he said, actually, what we found when we looked at the biopsy more carefully was that you have something called a Bellini tumor, and a Bellini tumor is very aggressive, and we see that it's gone into your lymph system, and we need to get you back in surgery as soon as possible. And I thought, well, that's too bad. That's too bad, but these things happen to people, and it's conceivable that it's happening to me. So I went home to tell my son, and I told him. And when I told him, I saw deep grief in his eyes. And, when Jordan and I were told, Jordan was sitting in the office, the doctor was talking to both of us. We were both receiving the news. So there wasn't I wasn't telling Jordan, he already knew. The first person I told was Julian. And when I told him, I saw that his mother was dying, which was a whole different scenario than that I was dying. Because I had always been in control of my life. I could decide if I was going to accept this prognosis. But when I looked in his eyes, I realized that I wasn't alone, that I was intricately involved with my son and my daughter who wasn't there, and my sisters and my dad who was still alive. My mom had passed away, but and there were friends and relatives and all of these people. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't know. It was wait a minute, and then I could feel the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. I didn't know what that was, but it felt like the weight of the world, as they say. I didn't know what that was. And it seemed really, all of a sudden, common sense for me to say to him, Julian, only God knows when I'm going to die. The doctor, he has an opinion, a medical opinion, but it's an opinion. It's not a certainty. Only God knows when I'm going to die. And so we're going to go ahead now with gratitude for each day that we have together.
Thanks to Gareth, who wrote in to say, whether you're a person of faith, agnostic, atheist, or none of the above, this series is both genuinely thought-provoking and inspiring. I could not recommend it highly enough. Leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts or simply posting about us on your social media helps others to discover the show. If you want to follow more of my work, why not get my fortnightly newsletter? I'll even send you the first chapter of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God book for free when you subscribe. And if you'd like to support the show, you can get early access episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters will receive signed copies of both my books. For the newsletter and to support, visit justinbrierley.com or the links with today's show. I'm interested in the fact that you kind of almost accepted that diagnosis with a lot of kind of equanimity yourself. Obviously, it was the moment you told Julian, your son, that suddenly you realized, actually, I do want to be there for him, for the family. And also that you turned, in a sense, to God rather than your own ability. You said, actually, this is ultimately in God's hands, but we're going to, as you say, be grateful for every. I suppose that is what that kind of diagnosis does. It makes you feel how precious life is when you're suddenly confronted with a diagnosis that potentially could cut that life short in that way.
Absolutely. And I think I'd had plenty of moments in my life to turn to God. You know, I'd had other brushes with death when I was a teenager and when I was a young woman. I even saw my life flash before my eyes on a ski hill once when I thought I was going to hit a rock on the way down a mountain. But those things, they didn't make me reflect at all, really. It had to be, and that's one thing I think about mothers, you know, mothers who, women who become mothers. You become mothers and something becomes more important than you. Your child becomes more important than you. And that's a step forward that's necessary for maturation and for the acceptance of God as the Father and as the one and only who can decide how your day is going to go. Yeah. And I think that when I looked at my son, it was that relationship that had first had me surrender. I surrendered to my babies for sure.
Yeah. You've used exactly the word I was thinking of, the idea of surrender. And I think a lot of people do when finally God makes an inroad in their life. It is that sense of surrender. And there's a certain kind of peace and serenity that comes with that, even in often very troubling circumstances. Now, this obviously was hugely challenging. You were then in hospital for some time. Tell us about the friend who started visiting you and praying with you on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I went to the hospital and had the surgery. I had the surgery and it seemed to go fine. We were very stressed the night before, but they said that they got everything and they took out my whole kidney and all the lymph on one side. And I went home and started to get better. But then a week later, my feet started to swell and it looked like they hadn't cauterized all of the lymph. And so my body fluids were leaking into the interstitial spaces in my body and filling me up with fluid. So I was drowning. And I went back to the hospital and they put a tube in my side to drain the fluid. They took 9 liters of fluid off my body. So it was substantial. But the biggest thing they'd seen. They hadn't seen somebody that filled up without, I guess I was pretty healthy considering what had happened and my body was pretty resilient. So I was able to, all my organs and everything were able to sustain what they were doing under duress like that. So they took all the fluid off and took a lot of the duress away. So then I had a nurse come every day to drain a liter of fluid off. I still wasn't comfortable after that, though, not at all. And I was told to eat no fat and that maybe the leak in my lymph, because lymph filters out the fat. And the fat really brings up all of the nutrients that should be discarded into the digestive system and expelled. The fat's doing its job, and the lymph helps the fat to do its job to keep us, functioning and having our system clean. And mine was doing a good job of that, but it got interrupted. So they told me not to eat any fat, give the lymph system a break, and then maybe it would heal. So that's what I was doing at home. I was laying in bed, really, and eating nothing but vegetables and trying to get better. But as time went by, my vital signs started to get less and less virulent. I was not holding up like I was. And my son was with me and his daughter, and they took my blood pressure a couple of times and they couldn't get my blood pressure. And so then I went to the doctor and he put me back in the hospital again, this time in emergency, because they thought I was going to have a heart attack, because that's what happens when your electrolytes go out of balance, because it's potassium and calcium that are making the heart pump, the having the electrolytes go back and forth. And I didn't have enough electrolytes going back and forth, so you're going to have a heart attack. And so I went into the ICU, and they, put me on fluids and everything and tried to balance everything out. And I kind of came to in the ICU, realized how sick I was. I was in there with maybe about 3 other people, and we each had a nurse. And I thought, oh, this is intense. What's happening here? That's for sure. And then they put me in my own room, and I thought that's probably not a good sign because they don't know what to do with me. When you go to the hospital, if you're with a lot of people, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. So just remember that when you think you'd like a lot of privacy. You don't want any privacy, because that means they're giving you a view because that's all they can offer.
Right.
So it was I was in that room, and I got an email from my friend Queenie, and she asked if she could come and visit. And I said, sure. And she came with a couple of rosaries and a picture of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus in an Asian form, because Queenie's Asian. And she left me this portrait, and she said that these rosaries had been blessed by the Pope. And she asked me if I wanted to pray the rosary. And I said, yes, which surprised her because she didn't expect that. She told me later. And so she thought that she'd pray me the rosary. So we went down to a nice part of the hospital that is called the atrium, and it is, I don't know how many stories high, 4 or 5 stories high, with trees in it and benches to sit. Anybody who could get there from the hospital rooms would go there, because it was very much like being outside. So it was a really lovely place to go. And she would go there with me. And she went there the first day and taught me the joyful mysteries. And then she realized after that she was going to have to teach me the sorrowful mysteries, because that was the next day. And I seemed so interested in it that she thought maybe she should come back and teach me that. So she came back the next day to teach me the sorrowful mysteries, and that went very well too. And so then she thought she better teach me the other 2. So she taught me the luminous mysteries and the glorious mysteries. And by then it was 4 days of her coming, and it just started to be a rhythm of things that she had never, this was not in her mind to do. It's just the way it worked out. And so she just continued to come, and we just continued to pray. And I spent with her, I think at 10 in the morning, I think I spent 2 hours. So she came with me and would pray with me for 2 hours every day. And she saw how deeply I came into it, right? So she wasn't going to say, oh, well, I'm done. It just didn't seem like the thing to do.
So this carried on for quite some time, Queenie praying the rosary with you. For those who, and I include myself here, Tammy, are not very familiar with the rosary, how is that distinct from perhaps any other kind of prayer that you might pray?
Well, first of all, you have a set of beads, right? So you have these beads. And I've been reading about the history of the rosary. So it's very cool history, because it used to be 150 beads. It was a lot of beads, and monks used it. It was a prayer rope, really, essentially. And it had nothing to do with the rosary at the beginning. It was called the Marian, what's it called? The Marian, I can't remember the last part.
Devotion? I don't know.
Okay, so let's say the Marian devotion. That's not exactly right, but the Marian devotion, and it was actually the priests, the monks in France, who decided that there was he was from the Dominicans. There was a priest that took an interest in it and decided to and devoted himself more to understanding what it was about. And then the bubonic plague came, and they took it to England. So it survived the plague, and it came with the Dominicans, and they ended up being the Black Friars in England. So there was another monk in England who had been praying to Mother Mary before he went into the seminary, and he would pick a rose for each prayer for Mother Mary. But when he went into the cemetery, they wouldn't let him bring any roses in. So he would imagine these roses with the rosary when he was praying, and eventually his devotion and him associating it with roses, they took the name the Rosary. So that didn't happen until the 15th century. I think it was something like the 15th century. And so and then it's come to what it is now. But it has a very long history. And although and each of the mysteries is a gospel story. And so it's kind of an interesting way to go through the New Testament every morning. And that is a good introduction to the Bible in a way. I've showed the rosary to my little grandchildren, and they love the rosary, and they are, they're very interested in it. They don't have there's no skepticism there, and there's no preconceived ideas of what it means to them. They just look at it and they're fascinated by it. And I think when they're really little, they like the rhythm of the prayers because it is repetitive, right? Maybe that's why a lot of people don't pick it up, is because it's so repetitive. But I did a lot of meditation, and I started meditating when I left the church when I was 12. So I've been meditating for a very long time. And so when I came to the rosary, the whole meditation came to me very easily, and it seemed good to me right off. And so when I spent my time with Queenie, and she was very good, she told me how to pray it. So we would share the prayer, where she would pray the first half would say the Lord's Prayer, and I would pray the next half of the Lord's Prayer, and she would pray the first half of the Hail Mary, and I would pray the second half of the Hail Mary. And that was the way that we went through the whole rosary. It was together, but at the beginning of each mystery, she would tell me the story that went along with that mystery. And for the joyous mystery, that's the Annunciation, and Mary's story of humility. And so one way that you can pray the rosary is to imagine what the story is, and then imagine what the what one of the virtues might be that comes out of that story. And for the first one, well, it would be humility. And so then we would pray. So I would pray on humility. When Queenie prayed with me, she'd just say, "Who do you want to pray for?" Right. And so we would choose someone to pray for. And it started out being my family members mostly that I was praying for. And I still have people I pray for. My sister's very sick, so that's heavy on my heart. She's got dementia. She's only 69. She's in a nursing home. It's very sad. But my other sister has taken care of her through these last few years. So, it's as good as it can be. And she's a peaceful person. So that's also amazing. Yeah. So I prayed for all of those people. And my dad was dying. And of course I couldn't see him. So it was sad. So I cried just like this. Yeah. I cried for 2 hours. And eventually the prayers became more, I'd pray for my dad, but I'd pray for all old people, or I'd pray for my sister, I'd pray for all sick people, or I'd pray for my son, and I'd pray for all young fathers. I guess he wasn't a father then, but I'd pray for all babies, and so I'd pray for particular people, but then I would universalize it. And so my prayers have grown and changed over the years. And Queenie, once I left the hospital and she didn't see me anymore, she said she came back weeks and weeks later, and I was still praying the rosary. And she was quite surprised because I kept doing it. It was comforting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And
You're welcome.
And thank you for your being so candid with, the ongoing prayers that you're praying for people who are very much still in the midst of challenging times. I mean, your health, I suppose, there was still a big question mark over whether this was all heading for you.
Yeah.
I've heard an interesting story that you actually sort of prophesied almost when you would be out of the woods to Jordan. Do you want to just tell us about that?
Sure. Well, Jordan wasn't feeling very well. He should have been in a hospital probably, although I doubt that because people with his kind of trouble, they just keep putting you on drugs, and that's not the right way to do it. Got to take them off the drugs. But whenever I'd go to pray the rosary, I'd come back, he'd be sleeping in my hospital bed. So I think that was a sign he should have been in the hospital because he was there with me as much as he could have been. He was always there with me, that's for sure. Oh, you have to ask me the question again. I can't remember.
Well, it was really what happened. You sort of almost prophesied your own healing to Jordan.
Right. But I was watching Jordan and I was seeing how much he suffered. And that was heavy on my heart. And I think that so I don't know. I thought if I could say something that would be comforting to him, that might be helpful. And so I just said what seemed reasonable. I said, I've had surgery. The cancer is gone. I just have this leak that is keeping me in the hospital and they can't find the leak. But I think that, things will be solved by the time we have our anniversary in August. That's what I think. And so I'm hopeful, so I wanted to give him some hope that this wasn't something that was just going to be forever and that he was going to have no life because it was all consuming. It was all consuming. He was still managing to write some, but it was my son had gone off to Ireland for a holiday with his wife, and then he got a call, your mom's back in the hospital. And so they came home, and it was, it was pretty dire the whole time for about however many months that I was sick, for everyone to carry on with their lives. So I wanted to give Jordan some hope, and that seemed like a reasonable thing to say. And so that's what I said.
And it turned out that it was actually on the date of your anniversary that you received the all clear, effectively. Just quickly, tell us what happened there.
Yeah, so I was in the hospital. They were looking for this leak. They couldn't find it. I had gone down to the States to where they thought they could surely find this leak. And I went to this hospital in Philadelphia, and I met Max Itkin, who was he was a good doctor, and he had done his work. I think he was from Russia. If he wasn't from Russia, the fellow who had started the whole interventional radiology was from Russia. And he had actually, I think, pretended to be a Frenchman, but he was actually a Russian. Because he wanted to marry some woman. I think that was why he did that. But anyway, so this doctor told me what was going to happen, that he was going to come. But he told me he was going to find it. If he didn't find it the first day, and the first day they were just going to put needles in my belly with a dye that they had put in with poppy seed oil, and they were just going to look for the leak through a screen because they had MRI guided visualization, which we didn't have in Canada. So he assured me he was going to find this leak. But if he didn't find it that day, so there was a small possibility he wouldn't find it, the next day they would, or in the next week, they would come and do something a little more invasive. And then eventually I would go home and I would have some sort of contraption that put me back together. He was going to put me back together. He assured me of that. And so the day of the surgery, he didn't show up. So I was all ready, but there had been a storm and a tree had come down and hit his car, and he couldn't make it to the hospital in time. So I think I came in there, and that's when another surgeon came in and told me all about Max Itkin and his history, because what were you going to do with this patient? He's sitting there waiting. So he told me a story for an hour about his the surgeon's background, and eventually he arrived. And he arrived, and I went into surgery, and I came out, and they hadn't found the leak. And so they put me back in the room, and they told me to eat this I hadn't eaten in 5 weeks because I'd had food right into my heart to keep me nourished. And that actually helped me to really be with it, because before that I wasn't very with it. And so when I went down there, they took that out and they gave me again non-fat food. But they told me that in 5 days they were going to cut me open and look. And I thought, oh, that's terrible, because the lymph system is like a spider web in your body. And I mean, to see that is, well, it's surgeons I just can't imagine having that kind of job, and the pressure that you're under, and the guidance that you must need from God, because good Lord, it's impossible work. Yeah. And I knew it was impossible work. Obviously it was impossible work because they hadn't been able to find this leak for, now it'd been, 2 months, and nobody had been able to find this leak in my system. And so I was doing all right. They gave me a place to eat outside, and just outside the room, there was a nice little place to eat, and I was doing all right. And my family was there again. They had come. My son and his wife were there, and my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law and her kids, and my husband. So they were all there. And they had Team Tammy t-shirts that they made. It was very nice. My sister-in-law, Bonnie, she's a nurse, and she's worked with people who are very sick. So she knows how to be with people who are very sick, and bring, she posted prayers on my wall of people who'd send prayers. She got colored pencils, and I looked at them, and it was good. It was good. Anyway, it was about 4 days. It'd been 4 days. And I knew that this surgery was coming, and I thought, oh, geez. And I thought, well, they told me the one way that they could tell if the lymph was closed, or if it was working properly or not, because I didn't know. I had this bag still of fluid on my side. They said, if there's something that looks like fat, so it's cloudy, that means that there's still a leak, and it's leaking into this bag, and so it's still leaking. So if you ate some fat, then we'd have an idea that it was still leaking. So I thought, well, I'm not going to wait for them to tell me when to eat some fat. I'm going to just eat. So I ordered something, and I can't remember. I think it might have been eggs that I ate. And I looked in the little bag afterwards, and I didn't see anything. And I thought, well, I don't know, but I did what I could do. I ate the fat, and that was the test. And okay, it's a fat challenge. But the next morning I was sitting outside, and the nurse and one of the interns came, and they told me that I was going to have to do a fat challenge. And I said, oh, well, I did one last night. And they said, oh, let's see the bag. I said, okay. And so I lifted it up, and it was clear. And for some reason, they believed me that I'd eaten something the night before. But they did. They believed me. And they said, oh, well, if the bag is clear and you ate a fatty meal, then the hole is closed. Like it's not open anymore. And so as far as we're concerned, we don't have to do anything more. You're healed. Oh. And so they had me go back in the hospital, and I took out the IV and the, everything that I was attached to. And a half an hour later, I was out of the hospital, and I went back to the Airbnb with my family. And when I got there, we realized that it was August 19th, and that was our anniversary. And none of us had been paying that close attention to what day it was. Because Jordan can't even explain it, which is hard on his logic. It's hard on his logic. Yeah.
When you saw Tammy's newfound faith and now her conversion to the Catholic Church.
Deepened faith.
Deepened faith.
She had faith of a courageous sort before that. She certainly had faith in the truth.
But how have you seen a change in her?
Oh, she's got deeper. That's for sure. She has more faith in herself, which has enabled her to attempt things that she had forbidden herself before, many things. She's speaking publicly, which she wouldn't have done before, although she may have liked to, even though she would have hidden that from herself, that desire. People hide even their desire to have their light shine, much less the light. They hide that from themselves, and that's lack of faith. They're afraid that if they admitted to the ambition and pursued it, it would come to naught. She's less troubled in her soul. That's a good way of putting it. She's recovered that state of childhood that Christ associates with the kingdom. And that's a remarkable thing to see, because I also knew her as a child. And so I can actually see that re-emerge. And that's quite the bloody miracle, that is.
That was Jordan Peterson talking to EWTN reporter Colm Flynn about Tammy's miraculous recovery from a condition that doctors deemed hopeless. You've obviously been willing to see the hand of God in some of these things, these coincidences and so on, even in very challenging times. I suspect, in all honesty, that all that prayer has really made a difference, not just to your physical state, but also to the way I think you approach God. I often think that prayer itself often gives you a different perspective on life. It forces you to stop looking at your own troubles and to focus on a much bigger picture and so on, to put yourself out of the frame so much. And how did your family react to your increasing interest in Catholicism, in taking faith seriously in that way?
Well, I think that they saw quite a change in me once I began to practice prayer, and I think it is a practice, and I think that's what makes it necessary. It's a practice, and you practice the things. You know, when I was sick and Jordan was sick, and we were very sick and didn't see each other for about 2 years. When we came back together, I didn't know whether we still. Everything had changed so much, because we had both really been through the ringer and didn't know whether our marriage still made sense. But the things that we'd practiced were the things that survived, you know. And one of the things we practiced was having dates together. And so we decided one day to have a date, even though he was still very sick. But we didn't have to say, well, how do we do that? And where are we going to do that? We didn't have to do that, because we'd already done that for 30 years. It's like, oh yeah, you know, go light some candles. I'll go have a shower, put on something nice, and we'll meet. And we danced. And it was okay. You know, it was okay. We had a moment together that was kind of normal. And we thought, oh, okay. So our relationship survived. And that's why you practice prayer. That's why I practice prayer. And so when my family sees me doing these things, they see the outcome of it. My husband has seen the outcome of it. My son and my daughter, I don't ask them how I've changed. They tell me, Mom, you've changed. You're a delight to be around. Really?
Yeah,
That's a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. It's the fruits. It's the fruit. By their fruits you shall know them. And in that sense, the you know, it's one thing to say I'm a Christian or I practice prayer, but obviously it's once people see the real change in people's lives that makes the difference. I mean, you've already referenced that Jordan Peterson himself was going through some extraordinary health challenges. This really came hot on the heels of your own diagnosis. As you say, he was already, you know, obviously suffering even at the time you were going through your own thing. What emerged was that there was a sort of addiction to, unwitting addiction to anti-anxiety medication that really was, it really forced him out of any kind of public role for I suppose the best part of a year and a half to nearly 2 years, actually.
Yeah.
And that itself obviously must have been incredibly difficult for the family. I mean, it must have felt like everything was sort of, after this extraordinary explosion onto the public stage, suddenly everything was sort of collapsing around you. There were all these challenges and so on. How did you deal with that yourself? How did the whole family deal with that? I mean, do you see God's hand in any way in all of these ups and downs that the family has gone through in the last several years?
No, I think I always see God's hand in everything now, but I had been practicing. It was very strange, right? It was a very strange time because first of all, I became sick and then I had this experience that was very religious when I felt the weight of the world leave me and I felt filled with love, really, and peace. And that was a moment of surrender. That moment was my first moment of surrender, I would say. And so, but then there were many moments of surrender as I went through my illness. And so by the time I was out of the hospital and Jordan was in the hospital, my life was about surrendering. And so I was surrendering to his troubles as well. And he knew that. And so did my family know that. And so whenever they talked to me, then it was, I was just, God's will bring us through this. However, we need to, however it comes out, it's not in our hands. And so I think there was a lot of struggle, right? There was a lot of struggle, but I wasn't struggling. I wasn't struggling at all. And I wasn't struggling for Jordan either. I had accepted that he had a cross to bear. It was so complicated, right? Because I'd gone back to eating meat in January, and then by October that year, I was diagnosed with cancer at the beginning. And Jordan had gone on the carnivore diet not that long after me. But when he went on the carnivore diet, he had been on antidepressants for years and years and years and years, right? From the time we moved to Toronto, he was on them, and we went on them when my daughter was in grade 2 or 3, so a very long time ago. My daughter's 31, right? So long time. And he went off those antidepressants too quickly. And that destabilized him in a way that it kind of, I guess, makes your brain inflamed. And so then it's more reactive and so he ate something that his system couldn't tolerate, and his brain was so reactive that it made him very, very, very anxious and unable to sleep. And he had to go back to university and teach. And so he went to the doctor for something to help him sleep and to control this anxiety that was so overwhelming. Really, he was just laying in bed. He was not able to do anything. And he felt he needed to go back to work. And so I don't think he realized, and none of us realized, that he'd gone off the antidepressants too quickly. And so really that was the thing. And then he took another psych drug, which obviously calmed down his brain. But in the aftermath of this neurological trauma, that he continued to have neurological traumas with these psych drugs that the doctors kept giving him over the months, so it was very complicated, along with how it began and then how it played out. And so, yes, he definitely had a lot of trouble, but it didn't really start with the benzodiazepines. It started with the antidepressants.
Right. Yeah,
which had been on for a very long time.
There'd obviously been a long history and story there, and in a way,
so
though,
people have to be aware of that, because people are on these drugs. You have to go off of those drugs over very many months under a doctor's care, just a tiny little bit at a time, because your brain. You can't, the brain, gee whiz, you have to encase it in bone. It's so delicate. you have to be careful with it.
Yeah. I mean, eventually he did come through that, and I remember listening and watching some of the early kind of videos that he did just as he was beginning to emerge again from that really difficult period where he was sort of having to come off and kind of learn to just function again, really. This was in early 2021, and I know that Michaela was very involved in helping him in that journey. I mean, as he has emerged from that and obviously gone back into public life, and as your family, in a sense, has again been exposed to all of that sort of, I suppose, inevitably a lot of fame, criticism that comes with it, and everything else. How the fact that you are now where you are, how has that changed the way, I suppose, your family deals with that? Does faith figure much, I suppose, in the Peterson family now when it comes to the way you just approach life together, having been through this extraordinary few years?
Well, I had plans to enter into the Catholic Church at Easter, and so a couple of weeks before, my daughter Michaela called me and said that she was going to be baptized. And she was going to be baptized on the same day that I was going to be confirmed into the church. And I thought, wow, that's a prayer for me that's answered. You know, when the kids were very, very young, I wanted to baptize the kids, and Jordan wasn't interested in it, and I didn't persist, so I didn't baptize them. But it was always something that was heavy on my heart that I hadn't baptized my kids. But I was overjoyed that Michaela was going to enter the church. So yes, it's changed things. You know, Michaela used to say to me, you know, I'd tell her stories about, and I see miracles in my life every day because I pray the rosary. I try to get myself in the morning so that if there's anything on my mind that I've given it to God as soon as I wake up, and so that I'm ready for whatever challenges God is going to give me for the day. And so, and now and then I'd have challenges and they'd work out in ways that I hadn't looked at because I'm pausing and waiting for the way things are supposed to be rather than imposing my will, you know. Yeah. And I'd call Michaela and tell her these stories, and she'd say, "Mom, I'm not there yet." And I'd say, "Well, that's okay. I just want to tell you what's going on in my life." And then eventually she called me and she said, "Yeah, I think something's happened to me." And so she's now baptized and really trying very hard to have God's will give her the guidance that she needs to. And the thing is, our family is definitely in the public eye. And so if we're going to be of service, this is the best way to do it, I think. So well, I'm all in as far as this goes.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about your faith. You've mentioned a little bit about Michaela's journey. I know many people in my circle of acquaintances for whom Jordan himself has been quite instrumental in them actually opening the door to faith. Many people for whom he's kind of opened up the whole idea of faith and religion, allowed them to take it seriously again. People who perhaps were very persuaded at one time by the Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris's, you know, sort of dismissing faith and so on. Obviously, Jordan approaches it very much through a psychological lens and through that Jungian kind of framework and so on, when he's talking about the value of the Bible and so on. Do you get a sense of how he kind of makes sense of all this from where he's standing? I don't
get it. I don't get a sense of it, really. I don't get a sense of it. He's got a great understanding of it. He knows the stories. He's getting so he knows the stories very well and understands what they mean, which is really helpful. It's so helpful. His interpretations of the stories, it's like, yeah, that's what that means. I get it now. And that's why people are listening to him, is because they do get it now. And his story and his journey, that's Jordan's journey. And he'll enlighten us as it happens. And I don't have any more information than anybody else does. But he's watching me. But he's definitely watching me. And he sees the changes that have come, and he can't understand it. And so he knows what it is. He's seen it now, very close hand. So we'll see what happens.
I know that his next book is we who wrestle with God. And I just feel like there is obviously a wrestling going on there, but it's a wrestling that is fascinatingly, I think God is using in remarkable ways, in all kinds of unusual, surprising ways. So I've personally been, in a sense, overjoyed to see the way in which so many people have benefited from that. I published a book last year, Tammy, called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. It features actually Jordan quite a bit in it, because I do feel like with the waning of the kind of very skeptical new atheist approach, there has been a kind of a reawakening of a sense that people are looking for meaning and purpose and identity. There's this meaning crisis a lot of people are talking about in our culture. Do you sense, I don't know, and your story again was another story where I've just been hearing so many people, intelligent 21st century people who are suddenly bumping into God unexpectedly. I just wondered whether you've been noticing that yourself in any way recently.
Yes, I definitely. I had a young woman come to church. She messaged me on Instagram, and she asked me if I was going to church, and I told her I was, and I told her where I was going and when I'd be there, and she came, and she said she was a Catholic. She hadn't been to church in 6 years. A young woman in her early 20s, and she only sat with me. I told her I was going an hour ahead because I was going to pray before Mass. And I didn't know where she was in the church, but she was there. And she said that was the first time in 7 years that she has been somewhere and sat somewhere and felt at peace. And so she came and sat with me during the Mass, and she was present, and she was open to experiencing what she had forgot was there, or never really personally experienced what was there, but she was definitely experiencing then, and that was really lovely to see. And so I've heard these stories from different people, but that was one that I was really there for, and I was very grateful to be there.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. I know that you also obviously hear from lots of people through the podcast that you run, the video channel, and so on. Do you get a sense that, I don't know, among millennials, those Gen Z, there is a renewed interest then in a spiritual dimension to life, in trying to find something beyond just the material?
Well, this woman was young, and I imagine she's one of many, because these things don't happen one at a time. Even my, the thing that I went through, although it was unusual, it's not. Other people are going through these things as well at the same time as I am. And even what Jordan's going through now, people are going through what he's gone through. So they're finding understanding, but through that understanding, they're finding surrender. And we need surrender in this world right now. Traveling around, I can see that the people that come to see Jordan, they're in better shape than they were in 2018. The young men who came back in our first tour, they came by themselves usually, and their stories were sad, most of them, but now they are usually coming with a partner, or their parents are with them. And they're telling us stories of years of putting themselves back together. Right. And so they look good. The crowds look good, and they're all dressed really nicely, and they're coming together in celebration, really. And it's beautiful. When I go out on stage, really, I thank them for coming, for taking the time out to listen to my husband, because he's got something to say to them. And I just thank the theater people and our security and everybody. And then I bring Jordan out on stage, and they're so grateful to be there and to listen. And this book, it's all scripture. Yeah. It's all scripture. Yeah. So that's good as far as I'm concerned. I don't know where it's going and why it's there exactly, except for it's necessary. I know it's necessary. And if Jordan has to be the one to talk about it, well, then so be it. But Yeah,
Well,
so I don't know what that means for us, but I do know what it means for the world. I know it means that there has to be a rebirth. There has to be. There's too many people gone astray now, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous.
Well, look, it's been a very hopeful, surprising conversation with you, Tammy. I really appreciate the time you've given and just the openness and honesty with which you've shared your journey and
pleasure.
And all of the ups and downs of it. I'm just, very hopeful as well. I think one of the reasons why, just this is my personal opinion, one of the reasons why Jordan has connected with so many people is because he feels real. He just kind of wears his heart on his sleeve when he gets out on stage. And I also sense that with you and the whole family dynamic, there's just a sense that we're watching something really real, not kind of packaged and sort of made perfect. And you're all on a journey. You're all kind of working out what this means for yourselves. But I think this gives a lot of people hope that there's kind of hope for kind of their lives, for their messy kind of, unscripted journeys, that actually God can do something
they have to be unscripted because it's not up to us to write the story. That's the adventure in it, Jordan says. But it's true that this isn't an adventure, our lives, and if you let that happen, all sorts of unexpected things are going to happen, and it's going to be remarkable.
Well, bless you. Thank you so much for sharing some of your journey with us, for being my guest on the show today. If you want more about Tammy, I'll make sure there are links, of course, from today's show where you can find her podcast and more resources besides. But for now, thank you so much for being with me, Tammy.
Thank you.
I really, really enjoyed this interview with Tammy. I just got a real sense throughout of a real calm and peace around her, a very real sense that her spiritual journey and prayer in particular has obviously been transformative. You can find Tammy Peterson's podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from, and there are links from today's show too. Thanks also to our friends at the Maybe God podcast, where this interview originally aired. There's a great YouTube version actually of this conversation with Tammy on their channel, and I'll link to that as well. We'd love to hear your feedback about today's conversation too. A special bonus edition of the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God podcast. You can email me via my website, justinbrierley.com, with your thoughts. And while there, do get yourself subscribed to my newsletter. You'll receive updates on this show, exclusive articles, news of upcoming speaking events too. Speaking of which, a couple of dates are coming up in the UK. I'm looking forward to being at Edinburgh University for a discussion with atheist YouTuber Alex O'Connor. We'll be talking about the surprising rebirth of belief in God. That's the evening of Thursday the 13th of June at Edinburgh University. On Tuesday the 18th of June, I'll be leading a morning looking at the Surprising Rebirth book at St Columba's Retreat Centre in Woking, Surrey. And then during August, I'll be back in the USA for a speaking tour in Southern California, visiting various churches over the course of about 3 weeks, including Vintage Church LA, Reality Ventura, Reality San Francisco, and Park Hill Church in San Diego. Now, if you get subscribed to the newsletter, you'll receive updates on all of those and further events as soon as they're sort of announced and publicly posted. So do visit justinbrierley.com to get hold of the newsletter. Again, the link is with the show notes. Now, thanks to everyone who's been leaving ratings and reviews of the show as well. Before we close out, I wanted to read just a couple of them. Josh says, excellent and surprisingly moving. Thanks for all your hard work. Thanks for leaving that review, Josh. And I loved this recent review as well. It was left on one of our science-focused episodes recently from Logan, who said, another brilliant episode. This is my favourite podcast and has contributed to me becoming a lapsed atheist and reluctant Christian. It's got me excited about every other Tuesday. Just love that comment. I'm coming across that phrase a lot at the moment, lapsed atheist. Interesting one. If you can do the same though as Josh and Logan, leave a rating and a review on your podcast app or share the episode on your social media with others. It does make a huge difference to help people discover this documentary podcast series. Just a reminder as well that this is of course a listener supported podcast. I can only do those shows with your help. If you want to get on board, do consider supporting me and the show via Patreon or US tax deductible giving. Silver supporters perks are early access to episodes and bonus content, Gold level perks include signed books and a chance for a regular Zoom conversation with me if you fancy it. justinbrierley.com to support or follow the links with today's show. Coming up next time...
Most of us long for unconditional love, and we long to be seen, and we long to be known, and we long for a deep intimacy, and we long for our lives to mean something, and we long to be part of a story bigger than ourselves. And that's hard to find on your own.
It was almost comical the way that she sort of talks about her incredible story of depression and suicidality and manages to crawl out of it by praying. And then Richard Dawkins has to go, yes, but do you believe in the virgin birth? Like, that's the important thing.
I recently participated in a wonderful evening at the Unheard Club in London, debating whether we're really seeing a surprising rebirth. Alex O'Connor and Elizabeth Oldfield were part of the panel. Freddie Sayers of Unheard was hosting, and there was a great Q&A with the audience too. I think you'll enjoy listening back to this. We'll be airing it next week before we return again to our documentary format. Today's show was a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and with support from the Jerusalem Trust. Editing assistance today from Peter Byram. Thanks for being part of this journey. See you next time. Thanks for listening today, and to Ellis, who left this review saying, one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. Historical, insightful, reasoned, and full of heart. So necessary in a culture that has forgotten why it is like it is. Just bought the book too. If you can leave a review, it helps others to discover the show. And if you want to buy the book, like Ellis did, you can get a signed copy from my website. As it happens, gold supporters of this show get signed editions of both my books anyway, plus lots of bonus content and early access. And of course, your support makes a huge difference to me being able to produce this podcast. So for the book or to support, visit justinbrierley.com or follow the links with the show notes.